Hi guys, today's Wednesday, April 19th. For today's assignment, you'll need a copy of the notes that are titled Technology of Space Exploration. You should have these folded in half and glued in the next clean page in your notebook. Here's your objective and the title of your notes. Remember, this goes on the outside of your notes after you have it all folded over. Your objective is we will analyze the role of technology in the exploration of space. And your title for your notes is Technology of Space Exploration Notes. If you need to, pause the video here so everybody can get it written down on the outside of your notes. This is what your notes page should look like. We're going to go through together. I'm going to tell you exactly what you need to write down. So you should have something to write with and you should be following along. Your textbook starts on page 570. It says, what are two types of technology that people use to explore space? So the two types of technology, and we've kind of talked about this in the last lesson, the two types of technology that we've talked about, the first one is crewed. So that would be with people. And the second one is uncrewed. That would be without a crew, without people on it. So they've got two types of spacecraft for two types of technology that we can use to explore space for two different reasons. So the space shuttle would be an example of a crewed spacecraft, not unscrewed, uncrewed. There. So our space shuttle would be an example of a crewed spacecraft, and then things like rovers and other things that we talked about in lesson 1 would be examples of uncrewed. Also on page 570, it talks about how do crewed vehicles reach space. In the first lesson, we talked about kind of the timeline for space exploration, and we said that it was a big competition between the United States and the Soviet Union, or what we now call Russia. In 1961, a cosmonaut, a Russian astronaut, named Yuri Gagarin was the first person to orbit the Earth. Since then, people have been trying to go into space further and further and further and get more information and more data and different things about different parts of space. So how did he get into space? How do we get crewed spacecraft into space? There are two different ways. The first way is with rockets. So to go past our atmosphere, we have to use fuel, a gas, and burn that fuel to escape the Earth's gravitational pull. So that's what we used to use, and they were pretty expensive, and they're not reusable, which is a big problem because you spend lots and lots of money building all of this equipment, but you can't reuse it. So you have to keep making that equipment, spend more money, so make a note to yourself that they use fuel, they burn fuel, like we do in a car and a vehicle, but they're not reusable. It's very, very expensive. What we use today is a space shuttle. It works kind of like an airplane. And the big thing is they're reusable. So we can save lots and lots of money, lots of time. We don't have to rebuild a rocket or rebuild a vehicle to reach space. You just fill it up with more gas and you can fly it again like an airplane. There's a picture of our current space shuttle on page 570 in your textbook. Page 571 talks about the technologies that we use currently to allow people to live in space. There's a lot of different factors that we have to take into account in order to be in space and to live and work for an extended period of time. Keep in mind that people aren't just going to space for a vacation. It's their job, it's their responsibility to carry out experiments, to collect data. So while they're there, they need a place to do all that. They need a place to collect data, to collect information, and also to communicate with scientists back on Earth. So technologies that allow people to live in space, what we use is the space station. We currently use the International Space Station. It's the only space station in orbit, and it's international because it allows astronauts from different countries to live and work in space, to carry out research and to collect different types of data and communicate back with other scientists on Earth. It also is going to protect them from the very, very harsh environment of space. It's very cold in space, and you get radiation from the sun because you don't have protection like an atmosphere to block out from space. So being in a space station is going to give them oxygen, it's going to give them food, water, everything that they need to survive. It's also going to give them a place to live, and in order to carry out information, to collect information, to get data, and send that back to Earth. Page 572 starts talking about uncrewed technologies that people use to explore space. Make a note to yourself, I did a typo again. It should be uncrewed, not unscrewed. Meaning it doesn't have people on it. There are 4 different technologies that we use to explore space without a crew. The first one is a telescope. Second one is called a space probe. The third one is called an orbiter. And the fourth one are landers and rovers. So telescopes, we put them in space because they can see past the Earth's atmosphere. If you have something that you have to look through the atmosphere with, that's going to be a problem because you are going to see pollution, you're going to be able to see, and a lot of stuff is going to get blocked out. Whereas if you have a telescope that's in space, you don't have to worry about looking out past the atmosphere. All of that is not taken into account. So add to this these orbit the Earth. And you can see past the Earth's atmosphere. So you get a better picture and you get better information. The second one's a space probe. A space probe is an uncrewed vehicle. It carries equipment and different instruments to distant objects in space. So whenever we landed on Mars, we used a space probe to land on Mars. So add to this, they carry equipment and instruments to distant objects in space. So it could be to another planet, it could be to a moon, it could be a number of different things. So they're going to collect material. Some of them can come back to Earth, and they return with like rocks, soil samples, things like that. Bring that back to Earth, or they'll send pictures or a number of different information, depending on what kind of equipment they have on board. The third one is called an orbiter. And as you probably guessed, orbiters orbit things, can orbit planets, they can orbit moons. So add to your notes, they orbit around another body in space. Orbiters are usually going to be for long-term study of an object. They can orbit around and send back pictures. They can monitor things like storms. They can give you information about a planet's surface or different features on the planet or the moon. They can create maps. There's lots and lots of information that you can get from an orbiter. The last two pieces of technology are landers and rovers. Landers and rovers. Landers obviously land on the surface. And rovers is a vehicle that come out of the lander, and kind of think of it like a little go-kart that you can kind of wheel around and control and collect information, collect samples, and send that information and that data back to Earth. So the lander is the larger thing that's going to land on the surface, and rovers are going to come out of a lander, and then you can zip around a planet or the surface of something and collect information. Page 574 talks about satellites and how we use satellites to observe different things on Earth. So when we talk about satellites, we're talking about artificial satellites. These are human-made objects that we put into orbit around the Earth. So we use remote sensing, which is picking up information from a distance. These are orbiting the Earth, and we use them for things like navigation, it's like GPS, weather tracking. You can track storms. You can track a lot of different things by using satellites. And communication is another big one. Satellite phones are using satellites to get a signal, a little bit different than a cell phone, but you can go long range. So things like GPS, figuring out where you are or where you're going on Earth, tracking how weather patterns move, and communication between equipment, communication between people are all ways that we use satellites. Page 576 says, what are some goals of crewed space exploration? There are 4 goals. The first one is going to be to explore cislunar space. Cislunar space is between Earth's atmosphere, the very edge of Earth's atmosphere, and the moon. So that's kind of the area of space closest to us. Things that we would study with cislunar space could be the effect that space has on people, the effect that space might have on plants, looking at how we can live and work in space for long periods of time. There's lots of information that we can get just by studying the region of space that's closest to us. The second one is to explore the moon. The moon is kind of like the bottom of the ocean. We don't know a ton about it, even though we've been to the moon a few times. But we're looking at developing plans with several other countries. We have an International Space Station, but we don't have anything currently on the moon, like a lunar base, that would allow us to live and work in space for extended periods of time. So that's a possibility for the future. The third one is to explore near-Earth asteroids. So near-Earth asteroids would be those that are orbiting closest to us. What those can do is provide clues about the early solar system. Add to exploring the moon, possible lunar base in the future. So again, with near-Earth asteroids, we can look at how planets formed, how different things in space formed, what gravity caused in the very early stages of the solar system and the universe. And the fourth one is to explore Mars and its moons. As of right now, we have not had any people land on Mars. We've had rovers and landers go and send back information, but we haven't had people. So sending crewed vehicles and equipment to Mars is a big one. So these are the 4 goals that we have, kind of our short-term goals that we have for crewed space exploration or exploration with people. Page 578 and 579 are talking about the different technologies that we might have in the future to explore space. The first one are launch vehicles and capsules. The second type of technology is places to live. So in order to stay in space for a long time, to stay on Mars or the moon for a long time, we've got to make sure that we can live there. We've got to figure out what we're going to do for energy, how are we going to get rid of waste. All of that stuff has got to come into effect. The third one, space exploration vehicles. So how can we use vehicles for high gravity, low gravity? How could astronauts use them to get from place to place or to get from moon to a planet and go further in space? The fourth one, destination systems. Destination systems are for allowing astronauts to stay really far away from Earth and to have enough resources that they have enough food, that they have enough water, that they have enough energy and oxygen in order to survive for a long period of time. And the last one, robots and robotic systems. So we're developing robots, and their technology that we use for robots and robot systems is getting better and better and better as time passes, but we're trying to apply that for space travel and space exploration. How can we use those to turn them into landers, or how can we turn them into rovers and get information and do tasks that an astronaut might normally do to make it safer or to get information and send it back to Earth. So that's all of your notes. Make sure that you don't have any blanks and make sure you got everything written down. And I'll talk about your homework on the next slide. Hey guys, for your homework, your page is page 581. It's a lesson 2 review. You're doing all 13 questions, and this is going to be due tomorrow at the beginning of class.